At Grandma's birthday dinner, my father raised his glass toward my younger sister. Brooke is everything a parent hopes for. A doctor. A success. Then he pointed at me. And Natalie? She's our family disgrace. The table broke into laughter. For once, I didn't laugh with them. I set my glass down and looked straight at him. Before I could say a word, Grandma stood. Enough. She slid a thick envelope across the table toward me. Natalie will be handling distributions from my $8 million trust. My mother's face went white. Dad stopped smiling. But what happened next mattered far more than the money. Because 4 days later, he needed my signature. Grandma Eleanor's 82nd birthday had started exactly the way every Pierce family celebration started, with my mother arranging everyone into their assigned places before dessert had even been served. Brooke sat beside Dad. She always did. My younger sister was 35, an orthodontist, polished enough to look as if she had walked into Grandma's dining room directly from one of the glossy advertisements hanging in her practice. Her dark hair was pinned neatly at the back of her neck, and the diamond studs Dad had given her when she finished residency caught the chandelier whenever she turned her head. I sat closer to the kitchen. That wasn't technically an assigned seat. It just happened so consistently that eventually no one had to ask me where I belonged. I was 38 years old. I had a mortgage, a career, at a university, a team that came to me when federal financial aid rules changed, and 3 people who had called me that morning because they trusted my judgment on compliance issues involving hundreds of thousands of dollars. Yet somehow, the moment I crossed my parents' front door, I became the daughter who could be asked to move her chair because somebody else needed more room. Mom had spent dinner praising Brooke's newest accomplishment. She and her business partner were expanding their orthodontic practice. Dad had already told the story twice by the time the birthday cake appeared. She took one office and turned it into 3, he said, lifting his wine glass toward Brooke. That's what happens when somebody knows what to do with an opportunity. Brooke smiled. Dad. What? I'm proud of you. I know. He looked around the table as if inviting the rest of us to admire his work. Then his eyes landed on me. I knew that expression. It was the half-smile he used right before turning me into a joke. And then, he said, we have Natalie. My fingers tightened around the stem of my water glass. Dad pointed at Brooke. That's our success story. A few people chuckled. Then he pointed at me. And that's our family disgrace. For half a second, the room was quiet. Then laughter came from several places at once. My uncle coughed into his fist while smiling. One of my cousins looked down at her plate. Mom shook her head at Dad as though he had said something naughty but charming. Oh, Martin. Brooke gave a short laugh. Not cruel. Not innocent either. I knew exactly what I was supposed to do. Smile. Roll my eyes. Say, very funny, Dad. Give everyone permission to pretend it was harmless. That was how our family survived uncomfortable moments. More accurately, that was how everyone except me survived them. My hand was cold against the glass. I remembered being 23 and laughing when Dad introduced me to one of his clients as the daughter still figuring life out. 27, when he told relatives Brooke was the academic one. 32, when he joked that at least my university job gave me something respectable to do with all those forms. Every time, I had laughed. Every time, I had told myself that making a scene would only prove his point. This time I put my glass down. The base clicked against the table. I looked straight at him. I didn't smile. Dad's grin changed slightly. It was such a small thing, refusing to participate in my own humiliation, but I watched him notice it. Before I could speak, Grandma pushed her chair back. Enough. No one laughed then. Grandma Eleanor was 5'2" and moved more slowly than she used to, but she had spent 40 years running the accounting side of the manufacturing business she and Grandpa built before they sold it. When she used that tone, people still listened. Dad lowered his glass. Mom, I was joking. No, Grandma said. You were enjoying yourself. Mom's mouth tightened. Eleanor, it's your birthday. Let's not ruin the evening. Grandma looked at her. I'm not the one ruining it. Then she reached beside her chair and picked up a thick, cream-colored envelope. She slid it across the table. It stopped against my wrist. My name was written on the front in Grandma's careful block handwriting. Natalie. I looked at her. What is this? Something I should have done sooner. Dad's expression had lost most of its amusement. Grandma folded her hands on the table. I'm stepping back from active oversight of the Family Education and Opportunity Trust. That got everyone's attention. Grandpa had created the trust years before his death. I knew it existed. Everyone did. It funded education and certain approved family opportunities, but Grandma had always handled questions about it privately with the corporate trustee. Nobody sat around discussing the balance. At least not with me. Grandma continued. The current value is a little over $8 million. Someone at the far end of the table inhaled sharply. She didn't look away from me. I've arranged for Natalie to take over the family distribution role. Mom's face went pale. Not mildly surprised. Pale. I noticed because my job had trained me to notice what changed when paperwork entered a room. Dad stared at Grandma. You did what? I chose someone who reads before she signs. His eyes flicked toward me. There it was. Not pride. Calculation. I put one hand on the envelope but didn't open it. Grandma, what exactly are you asking me to do? I'm not asking you to take $8 million, she said, dryly enough that Ethan almost smiled. The trust company still holds the assets. They still handle accounting and administration. This is about family distribution decisions under the trust terms. She leaned closer. And you are allowed to say no. Before I could respond, Dad gave a small laugh. She won't say no. I looked at him. He shrugged. Natalie loves this kind of paperwork. The room loosened slightly, as if he had found a way to turn Grandma's announcement back into something manageable. There it was again. The trick my family had perfected. If Brooke understood a complicated medical issue, she was brilliant. If I understood a complicated regulatory issue, I loved paperwork. I opened the envelope. Inside was not a check. There was a letter from Grandma, a trust summary, instructions for activating access to a secure portal, a beneficiary ledger, a list of current pending requests, and contact information for the corporate trustee and the attorney who had prepared the succession documents. Everything was indexed. Of course it was. Grandma had trained half her office 30 years before spreadsheets became normal. She believed information should be findable. I scanned the first page. You've already completed the change? The documents are in process, she said. Your access begins immediately for review. Distribution authority becomes effective, according to the transition schedule in that binder. Dad leaned back. Well, that makes this easier. I looked up. What does? He waved one hand. Brooke's education distribution. Brooke's expression changed. Only slightly. I turned toward her. What distribution? It's for the kids, she said. Dad said Grandma's trust was covering part of school next year. Dad spoke over her. It's routine. I looked back at the documents. The pending request list was clipped behind the trust summary. There it was. A 6-figure education request connected to Brooke's household. I looked at the date. It had already been prepared. Dad pushed back his chair. We can talk about it after cake. Grandma's birthday continued. Technically, people ate cake. Someone took pictures. Dad restarted a conversation about Brooke's new office. But the room felt different to me. Not because Grandma had mentioned $8 million. Because for the first time in my life, my father had insulted me and then immediately needed something from me. I just hadn't yet understood how much those two things had always been connected. After the relatives began leaving, I carried my coat toward the front hall. Dad followed me. Natalie. I stopped. He glanced toward the dining room to make sure Grandma wasn't behind us. The distribution Brooke mentioned needs to be handled quickly. How quickly? Monday would be good. It was Thursday night. I held the cream envelope against my side. What are the supporting documents? His eyebrows lifted. For what? The request. You saw the amount. I saw a summary. It's education. That isn't documentation. He exhaled through his nose. I knew that sound. It meant I was being difficult. Natalie. This isn't one of your compliance investigations. No, it's Grandma's trust. Exactly. Family money. That phrase sat between us. Family money. In our house, family money had always meant money I should not ask too many questions about unless somebody needed me to contribute some. Dad continued. Brooke has deadlines. I already told her it was handled. I stared at him. You told her that before Grandma told me I was reviewing distributions? He didn't answer the actual question. She needs certainty. Then you shouldn't have promised certainty before the person responsible reviewed it. His face hardened. You're already making this complicated. I almost apologized. The word formed automatically. Sorry. I felt it rise all the way to my tongue. Then I remembered him pointing across Grandma's birthday table less than an hour earlier. Family disgrace. I swallowed the apology. I'll review the packet. That's all I'm asking. No, I said. You're asking me to approve it. He looked annoyed that I had noticed the difference. I slipped my arms into my coat. I'll review it. He called after me as I opened the door. Don't make Brooke pay for whatever issue you have with me. I paused. For years, that sentence would have stopped me. It contained all the right buttons. Brooke. Family. My resentment. The implication that asking questions was an act of revenge. I turned. If the request is valid, the documents will show that. Then I left. The drive to my condo took 37 minutes. I knew because I had chosen the place partly for that reason. Close enough to my parents. Close enough to Grandma. Close enough that if someone called with an emergency, I could be there in under an hour. I had considered another condo closer to the university when I was buying. It had better light and a shorter commute, Mom had said. But what if Grandma needs you? So I bought this one. At home, I put the envelope on my kitchen table and made tea I forgot to drink. The beneficiary ledger was 12 pages. My instinct was to start with Brooke's current request. Instead, I started at the beginning. That was how compliance reviews worked. You did not begin with the allegation. You began with the rule, the records, and what could actually be verified. I opened my laptop and made 3 columns: claim, documentation, verify. On the second page of the ledger, I saw my own name. Natalie Pierce, prior education advancement. I read the amount twice. Then, a third time. My first thought was that I had misunderstood the terminology. My second was that perhaps it included something from my first year of college. My third was quieter. I would remember that much money. I leaned back in my chair. The kitchen suddenly smelled faintly of the peppermint tea cooling beside me. And for no logical reason, I remembered a blue duffel bag. I had packed it when I was 20. One semester, Dad had said. Grandma had needed surgery. Mom was overwhelmed. Ethan was still young. Brooke was preparing for college applications and Dad said her momentum mattered. I had been the obvious person to pause. Not because anyone held a family vote. Because I was Natalie, the flexible one, the sensible one, the daughter who could always go back later. I remembered standing in the kitchen of my parents' old house with my class schedule in my hand. What about spring? I had asked. Dad barely looked up from the newspaper. We'll see where everyone is by then. What if I lose my place? You won't. Brooke had been at the table filling out an application. Dad looked at her, then back at me. Your sister can't afford to lose momentum right now. I had wanted to ask why mine was cheaper. I didn't. I packed the blue duffel. I deferred one semester. Then another. Then I started working full-time because bills existed whether or not my plans did. For years, I told myself the rest of that story in my father's language. I lost focus. I stepped away. I wasted an opportunity. Sitting at my kitchen table at 38, staring at a trust ledger saying I had received an education advancement I couldn't remember receiving, a different question occurred to me. Why had my future always been the one everyone believed could be moved? I looked back at the page. I did not write Dad stole it. I did not write Brooke took my money. I wrote one word: verify. The next morning, I followed the activation instructions in Grandma's binder. The corporate trustees portal gave me current materials immediately, but older files were archived. The ledger showed summary entries. Not all supporting documents. Good. That meant I couldn't fool myself into thinking one spreadsheet told the whole story. I submitted a formal request for the historical disbursement packet tied to the education advancement listed under my name. Then I drove to Grandma's apartment. She had already put coffee on. You look tired, she said. I'm fine. She gave me the same look I gave students at work when they said an obvious problem was fine. I sat across from her. I placed a copy of the ledger between us. I want to ask you something without assuming the answer. Grandma nodded. I pointed to the education advancement. What did you understand this to mean? She adjusted her glasses. Her eyes moved across the line. I understood that it was used for education. Mine? She hesitated. I understood that you had either used it or agreed it should be allocated within the family after you stopped school. Who told you that? Another hesitation. Your father usually brought me those requests. I watched her face, but I didn't try to read guilt into it. Did I ever tell you I agreed? Grandma looked down at the ledger. No. The answer hurt more because she didn't defend it. I sat back. Then, I'm requesting everything tied to this entry. You should. Even if it turns out to be nothing. Yes. And even if it turns out not to be nothing. Grandma met my eyes. Yes. That afternoon Dad texted. Need Brooke's request cleared Monday. I looked at the message for nearly a minute. Then I typed. Nothing will be approved until the historical beneficiary records reconcile. I sent it. 3 minutes later, Mom called. My chest tightened automatically. I already knew the rhythm. First Mom. Then Dad. Then Brooke. Then someone asking why I was making things difficult. I declined the call. A second later I typed, please put anything concerning the trust in writing. Mom replied almost immediately. This is family, Natalie. You don't need to treat us like strangers. I started typing. I'm not treating you like strangers, I just need. I stopped. Deleted it. There I was again. Explaining. Proving. Trying to make a boundary painless for the people pushing against it. I locked my phone. On my laptop, an unread email sat beneath the trust notifications. Graduate Program Information Session Registration Reminder. I had saved it 3 months earlier. Every time I considered applying for the part-time master's program, I found a reason to delay. The workload. The tuition. Grandma. Mom. What if somebody needed me? The information session was Wednesday evening. My cursor hovered over the registration button. For once, I didn't check anyone else's calendar. I clicked. Registered. 1 hour. That was all I had claimed. One Wednesday evening, that belonged to a future nobody else had approved. At 5:23, a notification appeared from the corporate trustee portal. Archive disbursement packet available. I clicked the link. There were 7 scanned pages. The first was an old summary. The second showed the amount. The third contained the disbursement detail. I leaned closer. My name was at the top. Beneficiary advancement. Natalie Pierce. Then, I moved down to the payee line. I stared at the institution name. I read it again. It was not my college. It was not any school I had ever attended. It was Brooke's. For a few seconds I heard nothing except the refrigerator humming behind me. The ledger carried my name. The money had gone to my sister's school. And somewhere between those two facts was the story my family had spent almost 20 years telling me about why I had failed. I put both hands flat on the kitchen table. Then I opened a new document. At the top, I typed one word. Timeline. Timeline. The word sat at the top of the blank document while Brooke's school name remained open on the other side of my screen. For several minutes, I did nothing except listen to the refrigerator cycle on and off behind me. The easiest thing would have been to call Dad. The most satisfying thing would have been to call Brooke and ask why money listed under my name had paid her university. Neither would have given me an answer I could trust. At work, the fastest way to ruin a compliance review was to decide what happened before you finished establishing what could be proven. Anger made people skip steps. Fear made them accept explanations too quickly. I had spent years teaching new staff not to do either. Apparently, I needed the same lesson in my own kitchen. I opened a second document and divided the page into 2 columns. On the left, I typed, Trust records. On the right, my actual education. The trust entry came first. An education advancement had been charged against me during the period when Brooke was attending college. The archived disbursement detail showed her institution as the payee. That was a fact. Everything else still needed support. I went to the filing cabinet in my home office and pulled the folders I had kept through 3 moves. Tax returns, old student loan statements, tuition reimbursement letters from the university, Transcripts that still carried the dates I once hated looking at because they showed how long it had taken me to finish. By midnight, the table was covered. My first year of college was easy to account for. Tuition paid partly from savings, partly from aid. Then came the interruption. Then the long, empty stretch. Then, evening courses. Then employee tuition assistance. Then loans. Then more evening courses. The trust payment on Grandma's ledger did not appear anywhere in the records of my education. Not once. I checked again anyway. A compliance manager could overlook something. A 38-year-old daughter desperate to prove her father wrong could overlook even more. So I went slowly. Statement by statement. Semester by semester. There was no matching payment. By 1 a.m, a strange pressure had settled behind my ribs. Not relief. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt as though someone had moved a wall in a house I thought I knew. For nearly 20 years, Dad had used one sentence whenever my education came up. You had your chance. I had repeated it to myself more often than he probably had. You had your chance. You stepped away. Brooke stayed focused. Brooke knew what she wanted. You didn't. The dates spread across my kitchen table told a messier story. A story in which I had not stopped trying. A story in which I had simply been trying around everyone else. The next morning, while making coffee, I found an old photograph tucked inside one of the folders. Brooke was 18 in it, standing beside a used silver Honda with a red bow taped crookedly to the hood. Dad had bought it before she left for college. I was standing at the edge of the photograph holding 2 shopping bags filled with dorm supplies. For years, I remembered that day as one of Brooke's happy milestones. That morning, I remembered what had happened 3 hours earlier. I had been 21, sitting at my parents' kitchen table with a community college schedule folded beside my elbow. Spring registration opened the following week. Grandma was doing much better by then. She could walk without help. She was driving short distances again. I had already stayed home far longer than the 1 semester Dad originally asked for. I can take 2 classes, I had said. They're both in the afternoon. Mom was checking a list of things Brooke still needed for her dorm. What about Grandma's appointments? They're mostly mornings. And Ethan? He's in school. Mom gave me that tired look that meant I had missed the obvious answer. You know your father can't leave work every time something comes up. Dad entered midway through the conversation and took coffee from the pot. What's this? Natalie wants to go back to school, Mom said. Not continue. Not resume. Go back. As though I had wandered away by accident. Dad glanced at the schedule. This spring? Yes. He looked toward Brooke's acceptance packet, sitting at the other end of the table. Bad timing. My stomach had dropped even then. Why? Brooke's starting college. There's a lot going on. I'm not asking anyone to drive me there. That isn't the point. What is the point? Dad folded my schedule once and slid it back toward me. Brooke has momentum right now. We need to protect that. The word still sounded absurd nearly 17 years later. Momentum. As if Brooke were a train and I were a folding chair someone could stack against the wall. What about mine? I asked. Dad barely paused. You already stepped away, Natalie. Another semester isn't going to change anything. Brooke had been in the room. She was sitting 4 feet from me. For years, I had remembered her as silent. Now another detail surfaced. Her pen had stopped moving. Just for a second. Then she had lowered her eyes and returned to her dorm checklist. At the time, I told myself she was embarrassed for me. Sitting in my own kitchen now, photograph in hand, I wasn't sure what the silence meant. And I wasn't allowed to make it mean more than I knew. I put the photograph beside the timeline. Then I called Ethan. He answered during his lunch break. Please tell me nobody died, he said. Good morning to you too. It's noon. I've been looking at records since last night. There was a pause. That sounds worse than a death with this family. Despite myself, I smiled. I need to ask you something. His voice changed. About Grandma's trust? About me. That silenced him. What did Dad tell you about why I left college? Ethan exhaled slowly. That you quit. The word was so familiar it barely hurt anymore. Anything else? That Grandma had helped with school and you decided college wasn't for you. He hesitated. Then later you changed your mind. Did you ever see Grandma pay for my college? No. I was a kid. That's fine. Don't guess. I'm not. I heard movement on his end, probably a classroom door closing. Then he said, actually, there was something. My hand stopped above the keyboard. What? When I started college, you were still taking night classes. I remember. I asked Dad why you were paying for them if Grandma had education money. The room seemed to narrow around his voice. What did he say? That you'd walked away from your chance. The phrase landed exactly where I expected. Ethan continued. He told me not to reopen old drama. How old were you? 19 maybe. Did you ever ask again? No. There was no excuse in his answer. Just discomfort. Then he added, I think I emailed him about it. That caught me. You think? I was trying to figure out whether Grandma's education fund could help me too, so I might have asked in an email. I still have the account. Don't go hunting for something because you think I need it to exist. Natalie. I'm serious. If you find it, send me the original. If you don't, you don't. Okay. And don't forward anything to the family. He gave a short laugh without humor. Wasn't planning to. After we hung up, I added one line to my notes. Ethan questioned education funding while I was taking night classes. Possible contemporaneous email. Unverified. That was all. For once, I wasn't asking anyone to believe me because I sounded hurt enough. Around 3 that afternoon, I drove to Grandma's apartment with a folder on the passenger seat. The hallway outside her unit smelled like floor polish and someone's cinnamon candle. Grandma opened the door before I knocked twice. You've got your work face on, she said. What does that mean? It means I should make coffee before you start asking questions. She did. I spread only the documents she needed to see across her small dining table. No accusations, no dramatic reveal, just the archived disbursement page beside my education records. Grandma adjusted her glasses. Her finger stopped over Brooks University name. For several seconds, she said nothing. What do you remember about this? I asked. She kept reading. Your father said you weren't returning to school. I was trying to. I know that now. What did you know then? Grandma looked up. That you had withdrawn. That your parents needed help. That Brooke was starting school. And this money? Her mouth tightened. Martin said your education allocation could be used within the family because you weren't going to need it. Did he say I agreed? Yes. The answer came quietly. Did you ask me? No. There was no point softening the next question. Why not? Grandma removed her glasses. Because your father handled those requests. Because he was my son. Because it was easier to believe I understood what was happening than to admit I hadn't asked enough questions. The honesty took some of the air out of me. Not the pain. Just the temptation to turn her into the innocent person in the room. You knew I was helping you. Yes. You knew I'd left school. Yes. And you still accepted that I had simply decided I didn't need education money anymore. Grandma's eyes lowered to her coffee. Yes. I leaned back. For years, I had wanted someone older than me to say there had been a misunderstanding, that everyone had done their best, that no one realized what I was giving up. Grandma didn't offer me that. Maybe that was why I believed her. I'm sorry, she said. I looked at the archived payment again. I'm not ready to decide what that apology means yet. She nodded once. Fair. That was new too. No demand that I make her feel better. No reminder that she was old. No, but we're family. I gathered the papers. At the door, Grandma said. Natalie. I turned. Your father may remember this differently. That's why I'm using records. The muscles around her mouth moved as if she wanted to smile but didn't think she had earned it. Your grandfather used to say the same thing. I left before the comparison could become another kind of praise I didn't know what to do with. Brooke called that evening. I almost ignored it. Then I decided I wanted to hear exactly what she knew. Hey, she said. Mom says you're digging into my college money. Did Mom say why? She said, you think something was charged to your share. That's accurate. A beat of silence. So what do you want from me? The truth. Her tone sharpened. I'm not hiding anything. I didn't say you were. Another pause. I kept my voice level. What did Dad tell you about how Grandma helped with your tuition? That she helped? Anything about me? Brooke exhaled. He said some of the money had been freed up because you weren't going back. There it was. Not complete ignorance. Not full knowledge either. Did he ever tell you it was recorded as an advancement to me? No. The answer came fast. Then slower, she added. At least not like that. What does that mean? It means I knew there was some connection. I didn't know the accounting. You never asked? Her silence lasted long enough to become an answer. No. Why? What was I supposed to ask, Natalie? Whatever you wondered. I was 18. You weren't 18 forever. That changed the temperature of the call. Brooke's voice hardened. What exactly are you accusing me of? I'm asking what you knew. You sound like you're cross-examining me. I'm asking because Dad says I voluntarily gave up money that was recorded under my name. Well, maybe you did. I didn't. You don't remember every conversation from 20 years ago. No. Which is why I'm not asking anyone to rely on my memory. She went quiet. I could almost hear the defensive wall going up. Then Brooke said, "What was I supposed to do? Refuse college because you quit?" My thumb pressed hard against the edge of the phone. There it was again. Quit. A word she had inherited from Dad and chosen to keep. I didn't ask you to refuse college. It sounds like you're blaming me for going. I'm asking why you kept using Dad's version of my life against me, when you watched me spend years earning that degree at night. Brooke inhaled sharply. I'm not doing this. Okay. That's it? You said you're not doing this. I had spent most of my life chasing people down hallways after they ended conversations on me. I didn't chase her now. Brooke hung up first. The quiet afterward hurt more than I wanted it to. But it also gave me something I hadn't had before. A distinction. Brooke might not have designed what happened. She had benefited from not looking too closely. Those were not the same thing. They also were not nothing. The following evening, Dad agreed to a call with Grandma and Mom present. I kept the ledger open in front of me. Did I receive this education advancement? I asked. Dad said. We've already been over this. No, we've been around it. Did I receive the money? You had every opportunity your sister had. That wasn't my question. Mom jumped in. Natalie, your father is trying to explain. I'm listening. Dad's voice sharpened. You decided college wasn't for you at the time. Did I receive the money? No, not directly. 4 words. My pen stopped. Then why is it recorded under my name? Because you agreed Brooke should use it. Where did I agree? Not everything in a family is a contract. This was a trust distribution. Oh, for God's sake. Mom said my name the way she used to when she thought I had embarrassed her in public. I'm Natalie. I ignored the warning. What date did I agree? Dad laughed once. You expect me to remember a date from nearly 20 years ago? No. I expect you not to record my consent as fact if nobody can establish that I gave it. Mom spoke more softly. You're rewriting history. I looked down at the 2 columns on my screen. For the first time, that phrase didn't scare me. I'm checking it. Dad's chair scraped somewhere on his end of the call. This is exactly why nobody can talk to you. You turn everything into paperwork. No. Paperwork is what's left when everyone tells a different story. He went silent. So did I. I didn't fill the silence for him. After the call, my graduate application sat open on the laptop. I had been working on the personal statement for weeks. Halfway down the page was a sentence I had written months earlier. After struggling academically in my early 20s, I returned to complete my degree while working full-time. I stared at it. Nothing in the sentence was technically false. That was what made it dangerous. Dad's version of me had become polished enough to pass as my own voice. I highlighted the sentence and deleted it. Then I wrote, after interrupting my education for extended family caregiving, I returned through evening coursework while working full-time and eventually built my career in financial aid compliance. I read it twice. No blame. No melodrama. No apology. Just the truth. Then I submitted the application. The next morning, I returned to Brooke's pending distribution packet. I had avoided it deliberately until I understood the older entry better. The current request contained a beneficiary comparison worksheet. I scanned the calculations, then checked the date at the top. My hand stopped. The packet had been prepared 4 days before Grandma's birthday dinner. 4 days before she put the envelope in front of me. I called Grandma. She answered on the 3rd ring. One question, I said. All right. When did Dad find out you were naming me to the distribution role? She thought for a moment. I told your parents 10 days before my birthday. They needed notice because I wanted the transition records organized. I looked at the date again. 10 days. The request had been prepared 6 days after Dad learned. 4 days before dinner. I could see him at the table as clearly as if I were still sitting there. Brooke is our success story. Natalie is our family disgrace. The laughter. The pointing finger. The certainty on his face. I had spent 2 days wondering how a father could humiliate a daughter he was about to need. Suddenly, I understood that I had been asking the wrong question. He hadn't thought the insult would stop me from helping him. He had built his entire relationship with me on the assumption that it wouldn't. Dad had known I would soon be the person holding the pen, and he had called me a disgrace anyway. Dad had known I would be holding the pen. That thought followed me into work the next morning, through 2 meetings, a policy review, and a conference call with a department chair who wanted an exception to a rule he had already been told applied to everyone. Normally, I liked questions with clean edges. Regulations had definitions. Deadlines had dates. If someone disagreed with a decision, there was usually a document showing how we got there. At 10:30, one of my analysts stopped beside my desk with a student file open on her tablet. The prior award is being counted twice, she said. Once under institutional aid, and again under outside resources. I held out my hand. Show me. She walked me through the entries. Same amount. Same semester. 2 labels. One mistake creating a second consequence. I stared at the screen a second longer than necessary. Remove the duplicate before you calculate eligibility, I said. She nodded and started to leave. Wait. She turned back. Document why you corrected it. Don't just change the number. Got it. After she walked away, I looked through the glass wall of my office at students moving across the quad. One mistake creating a second consequence. That was exactly what Dad was trying to do. The old education advancement wasn't just sitting quietly in a 20-year-old ledger. It was still being used. I closed my office door and opened the trust portal. Brooke's current request contained a beneficiary comparison worksheet I had only skimmed before. This time I followed every figure. Education support already received. Current eligible expenses. Projected equalization. Brooke's branch appeared to have received less support than mine. That was the justification for approving more. I traced the calculation backward. There it was. The old advancement, assigned to me. The money that had gone to Brooks University was still being counted as though it had benefited me. I checked the formula again, and then again. If that disputed entry stayed where it was, Brooke looked underfunded. If it was removed pending verification, the entire comparison changed. The past wasn't being remembered incorrectly. It was being invoiced again. I printed the worksheet and laid it beside the archived disbursement detail. Same amount. Different effect. My phone buzzed. Mom. I let it ring once before answering. Hi. Are you at work? Yes. Can you talk? For a few minutes. She exhaled as though my schedule had personally offended her. Your father says you still haven't cleared Brooke's request. That's correct. Natalie, the children have tuition deadlines. I saw the dates. Then what are you doing? Reviewing the calculation. What calculation? They qualify. Based partly on a prior advancement recorded under my name. Mom went quiet. I could hear a television somewhere behind her. Then she said, You're still on that? The wording caught me. Still on that. As though 48 hours was an unreasonable amount of time to spend investigating a 20-year discrepancy. Yes. Your father already explained what happened. He gave me 2 explanations. That's not fair. One was that I had my opportunity. The other was that I voluntarily redirected the money. They mean the same thing. No, they don't. Her voice tightened. You always do this. You grab onto one little technicality and make everyone miserable. A laugh almost escaped me, though there was nothing funny about it. A trust distribution under the wrong beneficiary isn't a technicality. That money helped Brooke go to school. I know. So what exactly are you trying to prove? I leaned back in my chair. I'm trying to determine why money that paid Brooke's tuition is still being counted as money I received. Mom didn't answer. I waited. Silence used to terrify me when it came from her. It meant I had gone too far. It meant I should soften my voice, explain myself, offer a way out. This time I let the silence belong to her. When she spoke again, her tone had changed. Not softer. More practical. Your father already covered part of last semester himself. I sat forward. What? He helped Brooke because the trust distribution was supposed to reimburse approved education costs later. Dad paid Brooke directly? Some of it. How much? That's between him and Brooke. Then why are you telling me? Because he can't keep carrying it. The sentence came out sharper than she probably intended. I picked up my pen. Why not? Mom hesitated. Business has been slower. Dad owned a regional commercial supply company. He liked telling people it had never had a bad year, only temporary dips. How slow? Natalie, I'm not giving you his financial statements. I didn't ask for them. Then stop interrogating me. I'm trying to understand why he needs this approved by Monday. Another silence. Then she said, he already told Brooke it would be handled. There it was again. Handled. Did he use business money? No. Personal savings? Some. And he expects the trust to replace what he spent? He expects an education trust to pay education expenses. That isn't the question. Mom's breathing changed. He thought the trust would reimburse the family. The family. Not Brooke. Not the approved beneficiary. The family. I wrote the exact phrase in my notebook. When did he make that promise? I don't know. Before Grandma told him I'd be reviewing distributions. Natalie. That matters. What matters is that your father stepped up when Brooke needed help, and now you're making him look foolish for it. The sentence settled differently than she meant it to. Dad had promised money he didn't control. He had used his own savings to make that promise appear real. Now the business was tight enough that he didn't want to keep covering the gap. And I was supposed to turn his assumption into an approved transaction. You should tell him not to make promises on behalf of a trust he doesn't control, I said. Mom's voice went cold. You're enjoying this. My hand tightened around the pen. No. You've waited years to have something over Brooke. That's not what this is. Then approve it. There it was. The test. If I wasn't jealous, I should prove it by giving them what they wanted. For most of my life, that argument would have worked. I looked through the glass wall of my office again. Students crossed the quad carrying backpacks, coffees, umbrellas, entire futures no one had yet asked them to pause. I'm not approving a distribution built on numbers I can't verify. Mom said my name once, low in warning. Natalie. I have to get back to work. You're going to make this much uglier than it needs to be. No, I said. I'm going to document it. Then I ended the call. For several seconds, my hand stayed on the phone, not shaking, just heavy. A memory surfaced before I could stop it. I was 29 and standing in Dad's office at his company. He had invited me to lunch. At least that was what he called it. 10 minutes after I arrived, he slid a packet across his desk. Can you look at this? It was an employee benefits compliance notice. I glanced at him. I thought we were having lunch. We are. You brought paperwork. You understand this stuff. 2 days earlier, at a barbecue, he had introduced Brooke to a neighbor as our doctor, and me as the one who works with forms at the university. Everybody laughed. I had laughed too. Then, 48 hours later, the forms mattered. I spent most of that afternoon identifying what his office manager had missed. Dad thanked me by saying, "See, this is why we keep you around." At the time, I had smiled. The memory made my stomach turn now. Another came behind it. Mom at 31, telling me Brooke had built such a stable life. 3 days later she called because Grandma needed someone to drive her to a specialist. I had plans with friends. Mom said, "Brooke has patience." As though my calendar contained erasable pencil and Brooke's contained ink, I canceled. Again, the pattern had never been that they respected me less because they didn't need me. They respected me less and needed me anyway. Maybe the disrespect even helped. Every insult left me wanting to prove I was useful. Every comparison made me work harder to earn back something they had just taken away. My labor came cheaper when I believed I had something to prove. The realization sat with me until lunchtime. Then I opened a blank procedural notice. I didn't write it angry. I wrote it the same way I would have written anything at work. Pending historical reconciliation, no discretionary education request would be approved using disputed beneficiary balances. Future requests would require standardized documentation. Questions or submissions would go through written channels. No more, Dad already explained it. No more promises treated like authorization. Anything involving a correction that could affect my own beneficiary position would be independently reviewed through the corporate trustee. I read the notice twice. Then I sent it, not to the entire extended clan, only to the people who needed it. Grandma. The corporate trustee contact. Dad. Mom. Brooke. Within 6 minutes, Dad called. I watched his name flash across the screen. I let it go to voicemail. A second call arrived. Then a text. Call me. I typed back. If this concerns a distribution request, please email it. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Then? Stop acting like I'm a stranger. I stared at the sentence. Mom had used almost the same words. I didn't answer. By late afternoon, the pressure moved somewhere else. The family group chat lit up. Mom had posted, Natalie is delaying education support for children because she's angry about old college issues. Grandma never intended this trust to be used as a weapon. A cousin replied with a sad face emoji. An aunt wrote, surely you all can work this out privately. Someone else. The kids shouldn't be punished. I read the messages once. My pulse beat hard against my throat. The old instinct came fast. Explain everything. Post the disbursement page. Defend myself. Correct every sentence before it hardened into truth. My thumbs moved over the screen. I typed, that is not what is happening. The historical ledger contains. I stopped. Deleted it. The trust records weren't family entertainment. And I wasn't going to prove I was ethical by violating the very boundaries I was trying to establish. I wrote, the review is ongoing. I won't discuss beneficiary records in a group chat. Then I muted the conversation until the next evening. 5 minutes later, Dad called again. This time I answered. You embarrassed your mother, he said. By not discussing trust records with cousins? By making her look like a liar. I didn't call her a liar. You didn't have to. I stood and walked toward the window of my office. What do you need, Dad? I need you to stop this ridiculous freeze. It isn't a freeze on the trust. You know what I mean. I know exactly what I wrote. Come over tonight. No. The answer left my mouth so quickly that it surprised even me. Dad went quiet. What? I'm not coming over. We need to settle this. Then send me the documentation. This isn't something we're doing by email. That's exactly how I'm doing trust matters. His voice hardened. I'm your father. I know. Then don't talk to me like some applicant sitting across your desk. I stared down at the parking lot. Years earlier, that sentence would have sent me straight to his house. Not because I wanted to go. Because refusing him would have felt unnatural, like leaving a fire alarm unanswered. I'm not available tonight. What are you doing that's so important? I nearly told him. Nearly explained that I had a graduate admissions interview scheduled. Nearly gave him the details so he could decide whether they counted. Instead I said, I have plans. Natalie, I'll review anything you send in writing. Then I hung up. At 6:15, I closed my laptop, changed out of my work jacket, and joined the graduate admissions interview from home. The woman interviewing me introduced herself as Professor Harris. She had a warm voice and a bookshelf behind her that looked genuinely used instead of decorative. After questions about work experience and course load, she asked, why now? I had prepared an answer. Career advancement, policy, leadership, professional growth. All true. None complete. I looked at the small square containing my own face on the screen. I work with students whose education doesn't follow a straight line, I said. People who stop because they're caring for relatives, working full-time, raising children, dealing with responsibilities institutions don't always see. Professor Harris nodded. I was one of them. The words came more easily than I expected. I spent a long time treating interruption as failure. I don't anymore. I want to work on policies that make it easier for people to come back without having to apologize for the route they took. Professor Harris smiled slightly. That sounds less like a reason to earn a degree, and more like a reason to use one. For the first time all day, my shoulders loosened. After the interview ended, I didn't immediately check the family chat. I made dinner, ate at the table instead of standing over the sink, washed the plate. Then, because the evening still belonged to me, I walked around my neighborhood for 20 minutes. The air smelled like wet pavement. Someone had planted late-blooming flowers along the path near the community mailbox. Nothing dramatic happened. No revelation. No one applauded me for choosing a walk over a crisis. That was partly why it mattered. Back inside, I finally checked my phone. Brooke had sent one message. "Can we meet tomorrow?" I agreed to coffee near her office. She arrived 10 minutes late in navy scrubs under a camel coat, her hair pulled back, phone still in her hand. "You sent that notice to everyone," she said before sitting. "I sent it to the people involved. You made it sound like there's some fraud investigation." I said, "The historical balance is being reconciled." "Same difference." "No." Brooke dropped into the chair across from me. "You know what I mean." "I do. I disagree." A server came by. Brooke ordered coffee. I already had mine. When we were alone again, I took 2 pages from my folder. Not the entire trust file. Only the entries directly relevant to the calculation affecting us both. "This is the old advancement under my name," I said. "This is the payee." Brooke looked. Her face didn't go blank. That mattered. Her jaw tightened. She read the institution name, then the date. "Dad told me you gave this up. You said he told you it was freed up because I wasn't going back." "That's what I mean." "It isn't the same." "Oh, come on. Did he tell you I agreed?" She looked away toward the window. "I assumed you did." "Why?" "Because why else would Grandma pay my school?" "Did you ever ask me?" "No." "Did you ever wonder?" Her eyes snapped back to mine. "I was 18. You were 18 when it happened." Her mouth tightened. I continued. "You were 24 when I was still taking night classes, 28 when Dad joked that you were the academic one, 30 when you told me at Christmas that maybe I would have gone further if I had learned to stick with things." Color rose along her neck. "I don't remember saying that." "I do." "So this is what you want? A list of every mean thing I ever said?" "No. Because it sure sounds like it. I want you to stop pretending you never saw anything that didn't fit Dad's story." Brooke sat back. "You're acting like I stole something from you." "I'm saying you benefited from something you chose not to question." Her eyes hardened. "That's convenient." "What is?" "You get to make yourself the victim, and me the spoiled sister." "I haven't called you spoiled." "You don't have to." The words were defensive, but underneath them, I saw something more complicated than surprise. She understood enough about money to know what the pages meant. She also understood what it would mean to admit she had preferred not knowing. Brooke pushed the documents back toward me. "You know what? If Dad did the accounting wrong, fix the accounting. But don't rewrite my entire life because you're angry." "I'm not trying to rewrite your life." "Then stop treating everything I achieved like it came from you." I held her gaze. "I'm trying to stop everyone from treating what I gave up like it never existed." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then her phone buzzed. She grabbed it immediately. "I have patience." "Okay." Brooke stood. At the edge of the table, she stopped. "Dad really did tell me you didn't want to go back." I looked at her. "And when you saw me going back?" Her mouth opened, closed. Then she left. I stayed at the cafe until my coffee went cold. I didn't feel triumphant. Brooke wasn't absolved. She wasn't exposed as some secret mastermind either. She had done something more ordinary, and, in its own way, more painful. She had accepted the version of events that cost her least. That afternoon, Grandma forwarded me a short administrative email from years earlier that the corporate trustee had included in the archive index. It didn't prove the transfer by itself. What caught my attention was the language around family coordination. Dad had been the one presenting education requests. Mom had often been copied. Even without formal authority, she had been part of the communication stream. Her behavior suddenly made more sense. She wasn't protecting a trust position. She was protecting the structure she had trusted for decades. Dad handled money. Dad made decisions. Brooke represented success. I absorbed inconvenience. If one piece moved, she had to ask whether the entire arrangement had ever been as fair as she told herself. My inbox pinged. A new email from Dad. Subject line: Brooke education needs full calculation. I opened it. The message was only 3 sentences. Since you insist on making this complicated, I've attached the family calculation showing why Brooke's household is still entitled to the requested education support. This is the same information we have always used. Please clear this so everyone can move forward. Attached was a spreadsheet. I saved a copy before opening it. Then I checked the file metadata available to me and noted the date I received it. Habit. Documentation. The first several rows were ordinary. Beneficiary names. Prior support. Current requests. Projected balances. Then I reached the line under my name. Natalie Pierce, prior education benefit. The same disputed amount. I moved across the row. There was a notes column I hadn't seen on the earlier trust worksheet. My breath caught. 4 words sat beside the entry. Voluntarily redirected to Brooke. I read them again. Dad hadn't written. Possible recollection. He hadn't written. Family understanding. He had written it as fact. Today. Not 20 years ago. Today. There was no attached consent. No signature. No email from me. No date on which I had supposedly agreed. Just a sentence that had somehow survived long enough to become arithmetic. For 20 years, Dad had told me I wasted my opportunity. Now, trying to force me to approve another one for Brooke, he had finally put in writing what he claimed I had done with mine. 4 words sat beside my name. Voluntarily redirected to Brooke. I saved Dad's spreadsheet in a separate folder, printed a copy, and wrote the date across the top. Then I did the one thing he probably expected least. I didn't call him. There was nothing useful to gain from asking why he had written it. He would explain, then explain the explanation. By the 3rd version, I would be defending my memory instead of examining his claim. So, I went looking for the thing that mattered. Proof that I had ever agreed. The trust archive held no signed consent from me. No email, no letter, no beneficiary direction. Nothing showing a conversation in which I had knowingly surrendered an education allocation to Brooke. Absence alone didn't prove a conversation had never happened, and I refused to pretend otherwise. But Dad's new spreadsheet was different. He wasn't recalling an uncertain conversation over coffee. He was using my supposed consent as a current financial fact. That fact was helping justify another distribution. By lunchtime, I had sent the spreadsheet, archived disbursement packet, beneficiary ledger, and my own education records to the fiduciary reviewer assigned through the corporate trustee. My message was simple. I asked for an independent reconciliation of the disputed advancement and for confirmation of whether it could continue to be used in beneficiary comparisons while its classification was unresolved. Then I went back to doing my actual job. For nearly 2 hours, I managed to think about nothing except work. A student's appeal had been delayed because 2 departments were each waiting for the other to correct a coding problem. Nobody had done anything malicious. Everybody had simply assumed somebody else would fix it. By the time I finished the review, I had identified where the process broke, assigned responsibility to the correct office, and documented the correction so the next student wouldn't get trapped the same way. The irony wasn't subtle. At 3:47, Mom called. I considered letting it go to voicemail. Then I answered because I wanted to know what pressure looked like now that guilt alone hadn't worked. Natalie. No hello. Hi Mom. Brooke called me. I assumed she might. She's extremely upset. I know. She says you showed her financial records. Only entries directly relevant to the calculation affecting both of us. Mom made a frustrated sound. You hear yourself, don't you? Yes. You're talking about your sister like she's a case file. No, I'm talking about a trust like it has rules. You always have an answer. That used to sting. Now it mostly sounded like frustration that the old shortcuts weren't working. What do you need from me? I need you to stop punishing everyone because you're angry with your father. I haven't punished anyone. Brooke has commitments. What commitments? School. I know what the request is for. No, you don't understand. Your father already covered part of the previous semester because he was told the trust money would come through. That part wasn't new. What came next was, he used our savings, Natalie. I straightened. Our savings? Joint savings. And some money he'd planned to keep in the business. How much? That isn't your business. Then why are you telling me? Because you're acting like this decision affects nobody. I know it affects people. That doesn't make the numbers accurate. Martin thought he would be reimbursed. By whom? The trust. Dad isn't the beneficiary. You know what I mean. I actually don't. Mom's voice dropped. Business has been tight this year. Dad would have called it a temporary cash flow problem. He hated the word tight. I wrote it down anyway. How tight? I'm not giving you private business information. I didn't ask you to. I'm trying to understand why Monday became an emergency, because he already helped Brooke. And he assumed the trust would replace what he spent. He didn't assume, he was told. By whom? Silence. The refrigerator in the break room hummed through the wall behind me. Then Mom said, "Your father has always handled these things." There it was. Not authority. Habit. Dad made a promise because he was accustomed to his promises becoming reality. Mom continued. He was trying to take care of his daughter and grandchildren. Then he was free to use his own money. That is such an ugly thing to say. It's accurate. You think because you have some temporary authority now, you get to sit in judgment over everybody. No. Then approve what Grandma intended. Grandma intended the trust to be administered according to its terms. You know what I mean? That phrase again. You know what I mean. It had covered an incredible amount of ground in our house. You know what I mean when I call you selfish. You know what I mean when Brooke needs it more. You know what I mean when your plans are flexible. You know what I mean when your father says something cruel. Translation had always been my unpaid second job. Not anymore. If Dad promised Brooke money before approval, I said, Dad needs to explain that to Brooke. Mom went quiet. Then she said 5 words that might as well have been carved over the front door of my childhood home. But you can fix it. My hand stopped moving. There it was. Not you're wrong. Not the records are wrong. Not Brooke qualified. You can fix it. I stared at the sentence I had written on my pad from a meeting earlier that morning. Responsibility must follow authority. At work, it was common sense. At home, it had apparently been optional. I'm not fixing a promise I didn't make, I said. Mom inhaled sharply. You've changed. Maybe she meant it as an accusation. For the first time, it sounded almost like evidence. Yes, I said. Then I ended the call. That evening, I opened the trunk of my car to put away a reusable grocery bag. The old overnight bag was still there. Black nylon, one broken zipper pull, a side pocket bulging around a phone charger. I had kept some version of that bag in my car for years. Toothbrush, travel toothpaste, spare blouse, sneakers, basic toiletries. At first, it had been practical. Grandma had appointments. Mom occasionally needed help. Once Ethan had broken his wrist at school while Dad was out of town and Brooke had been in residency. Over time, the bag stopped being preparation for emergencies. It became preparation for interruption. I remembered leaving a professional conference before the final session because Mom called to say Grandma had been dizzy and someone needed to stay with her overnight. By the time I arrived, Grandma was fine. Dad was home. Mom was home. Brooke lived less than 30 minutes away. Nobody had even asked them. Mom had simply called me first. Another time, I left a weekend trip with 2 friends because Dad said he needed someone to drive Grandma to an appointment Monday morning. I drove home Sunday afternoon. The appointment turned out to be Tuesday. I had never asked why no one else rearranged anything. That question had always felt selfish. Now I put one hand on the old bag and realized I had carried an entire philosophy around in my trunk. Be ready to leave your own life. Someone else might need it. I zipped the side pocket closed. I wasn't ready to remove the bag yet, but for the first time, I saw it. The next morning, the fiduciary reviewer called. Her name was Karen Bell. We had already exchanged documents through the corporate trustees' secure system. I want to be careful about what I can and cannot tell you, she said after introductions. I appreciate that. The historical disbursement is clearly charged against your beneficiary record. The payee documentation shows the funds benefited Brooke's education. I wrote as she spoke. I have not found verified documentation establishing your consent to redirect that advancement. Does that mean the entry gets moved? Not automatically. We need to reconcile the historical treatment under the trust terms and the records available at the time. But until that is completed, I would not recommend using the disputed entry to support a new equalization calculation. That was all I needed from her. Not a verdict against Dad. Not a speech about fairness. A professional confirmation that the current calculation could not reasonably stand on an unresolved number. What about corrections that increase my beneficiary position? That is exactly why independent review matters, Karen said. You should not be the sole person deciding an adjustment that benefits you. Agreed. We can complete the reconciliation without you determining the amount yourself. Good. After the call, I wrote down what I intended to do once the review was complete. Correct the ledger, according to independently verified records. No retroactive punishment beyond what the trust allowed. No special exception for Brooke. Same documentation standard for everyone going forward. The list felt almost boring. That was reassuring. Revenge usually required creativity. Fairness mostly required consistency. Ethan called that afternoon. I found it. I closed my office door. The email? Yeah. Send the original. Don't screenshot it. You really are a nightmare. That's why people pay me. He laughed once. Then his voice became quieter. I had remembered most of it right. The email arrived while we were still speaking. It was from years earlier, when Ethan was 19. His younger writing style was unmistakable. He had asked Dad whether Grandma's education fund could help me because I was still taking night classes and paying for them while working. Dad's reply was short. Brooke's tuition is handled. Natalie made her choice years ago. Don't reopen this. I read it twice. Not because it proved where the money went. I already had better evidence for that. It mattered because Ethan had questioned the story while I was still struggling through my degree, and Dad had actively shut the question down. Do you want me to send it to Mom and Brooke? Ethan asked. No. Why not? Because I'm not building a family group chat trial. So what do you want me to do? Nothing else. That's it? You found something you actually had. You sent it to me. That's enough. His voice softened. I should have asked again. You were 19. I wasn't 19 forever. The sentence sounded painfully familiar. Brooke, Ethan. All of us aging around a story nobody revisited because Dad said it was settled. You're asking now, I said. After we hung up, I filed the email with the rest. Then I called Brooke. She agreed to meet at my condo that evening. When she arrived, she wore jeans and a cream sweater instead of scrubs. Her hair was loose. She looked less like Dr. Pierce and more like the girl who once sat beside me on the floor opening Christmas presents. That made what came next harder. I placed 3 documents on the dining table. The historical ledger, the archived disbursement, the current beneficiary worksheet. Brooke sat without touching them. I already saw these. You saw part of them. I want you to see what the old entry is doing now. I walked her through the numbers. She followed immediately. Her eyes moved from one column to the next. No confusion. No need for me to simplify it. When she reached the disputed advancement, she leaned back. So, if this comes off your side, I'm not saying what the final correction is yet, but if it does, my current request looks different. Yes, her lips pressed together. Dad said yours had already been accounted for. It had, incorrectly. You don't know that the allocation was unauthorized. I know nobody has produced evidence that I authorized it. You could have said yes. I could have. Brooke looked relieved for half a second. I continued. But I was asking Dad when I could go back to school during the same period he was telling people I wouldn't. The relief vanished. Grandma said that? Grandma said. Dad told her I didn't need the money because I wasn't returning. Brooke stared at the table. I waited. Then she said, Dad always told me you didn't want college anymore. And when you watched me take night classes for 6 years? Her shoulders stiffened. I thought you changed your mind. Every semester. What do you want me to say? The truth would be useful. Her face flushed. I knew there were things that didn't make sense. Okay? The room went very still. What things? Sometimes Dad would say you'd used your chance. Other times he'd say you let me have it because I had a clearer plan. She rubbed both hands against her jeans. I didn't ask which one was true. Why? Brooke's eyes flashed. Because I was busy surviving school. And afterward? I don't know. Yes, you do. She stood suddenly. You want me to say I didn't ask because the answer might make me feel guilty? I said nothing. Brooke laughed sharply. Fine. Maybe. There it was. Not innocence. Not conspiracy. Choice. She paced toward the window. I worked for everything I have, Natalie. I know. You keep saying that, but you're looking at me like my whole career belongs to you. I have never said that. You don't have to. Then stop answering accusations I haven't made. She turned. What are you making me responsible for? Not what Dad did. Her expression shifted. For what you did after. She stared at me. You used his version too. Every time you called me flaky, every time you said I should have stuck with school, every time you let Dad compare us and decided it was easier not to ask why the comparison worked so well for you. The anger in her face changed. Shame was quieter. It made her look younger. Brooke grabbed her purse. You're acting like I stole something. I'm saying you benefited from something you chose not to question. That is not the same thing. I know. She stopped near the door. Maybe she had expected me to argue harder. Instead, I opened it. I'm not asking you to solve this tonight. Brooke left without saying goodbye. I closed the door and leaned against it. The old version of me would have called within 10 minutes. I would have explained that I loved her, promised I wasn't blaming her, made sure she didn't go to bed angry. That impulse was still there. I let it pass. The next morning, Dad emailed asking to meet. Not at his house. A coffee shop halfway between us. That alone told me something. He wanted neutral ground, because commands had stopped working over the phone. He was already seated when I arrived. No coffee in front of him. Just a folder and a pen. You look tired, he said. I'm fine. You always say that. I sat across from him. What did you want to discuss? He looked at me for several seconds. Then he opened the folder. Maybe the accounting 20 years ago wasn't perfect. It was the first concession I had heard from him. I waited. He tapped one page. That doesn't mean Brooke's current needs aren't legitimate. They may be. The calculation still has to be corrected. Then correct it later. No. His jaw tightened. Approve the current distribution. Karen or whoever can clean up the old entries afterward. No. Natalie, listen to me. I am. Business has been slower than expected. I covered part of Brooke's costs because this trust exists for education. You covered them because you promised her the trust would. He leaned closer. And now you can make good on that. I didn't make the promise. His eyes hardened. This obsession with technical responsibility is exactly why dealing with you is exhausting. A familiar warmth spread through my chest. Not anger. Something more dangerous. The urge to prove I wasn't exhausting. Dad shifted strategies. His voice softened. You are good at this. I looked at him. You always have been. For 38 years, I had wanted sentences like that from him. Not jokes. Not backhanded compliments. Recognition. He pushed the pen toward me. You're the one person in this family who knows how to fix things when they get complicated. My fingers moved before I consciously decided to move them. I touched the pen. Dad saw it. His shoulders relaxed. That tiny reaction told me more than anything he had said. He thought he had found the right door. Not money. Not anger. Usefulness. Tell Natalie she matters because she can rescue everyone. She'll come back. I picked up the pen. For one awful second, approving the exception felt easier than breathing. The fighting would stop. Mom would calm down. Brooke wouldn't have to rearrange plans. Dad wouldn't have to admit he promised money he didn't control. Grandma could have her family back. All it would cost was one exception. One more time. One semester. One weekend. One ride. One signature. I set the pen down. Dad's expression changed. No. What? No special approval until the reconciliation is finished. His face darkened. You have the authority. That's exactly why I'm not using it that way. For God's sake, Natalie. You can fix this. I looked at the pen between us. That's exactly why I'm not doing it. He stared at me. What does that even mean? It means I'm done fixing systems that only work when I lose something. Dad pushed back from the table. This isn't about you losing anything. It always is. You're being dramatic. No, I'm being consistent. He stood. So Brooke rearranges her children's schooling because you need to prove a point. She can submit a request after the balances are corrected under the same standards as everyone else. You know what? Maybe your mother was right. About what? You got a little authority and suddenly you think you're better than everybody. I looked up at him. No, I think the rules apply to everybody. He grabbed his folder. You'll regret making your sister pay for your resentment. I didn't answer. Dad waited. Maybe for an apology. Maybe for me to chase him. I did neither. By the time I got home, the corporate trustee portal showed my formal hold on the disputed calculation. No special approval. Same review standards. My phone rang. Mom, I answered. What did you say to your father? The same thing I've been saying. He came home furious. That's unfortunate. Unfortunate? What do you want me to say? I want you to act like his daughter. The sentence barely made sense anymore. What does that require? You know exactly what it requires. There it was again. Translation. This time I made her say it. No. Tell me. Mom went silent. Then her voice sharpened. Approve the request. Stop humiliating your father. Stop turning Brooke against us. And stop acting like a 20-year-old bookkeeping issue matters more than your own family. It matters because it's still being used now. I don't care. The bluntness surprised both of us. She recovered quickly. If you do this, Natalie, don't bother coming home. My stomach dropped. There were sentences you could prepare for intellectually and still feel physically when they arrived. My childhood bedroom. Sunday dinners. Christmas. The front porch where Dad used to wait when I came home late. Mom's kitchen. Grandma's birthday table. An entire definition of home compressed into one threat. A year earlier, I would have begged her to take it back. Instead, I heard my own voice come out quiet. I heard you. Mom waited. For once in your life, think about what you're doing. I am. She ended the call. I sat on the couch with the phone in my hand, until the screen went dark. The silence afterward wasn't peaceful. It was grief. I had always imagined setting a real boundary would feel powerful. Mostly, it felt like losing something I had spent years trying to prove I deserved. Then my laptop chimed from the dining table. I almost ignored it. Another trust email. Probably. Instead, I opened the screen. The subject line made me blink. Graduate Program Admission Decision. For a few seconds, I couldn't click. Then I did. The first sentence began with congratulations. I had been accepted. Part-time. Designed for working professionals. My employee education benefit would cover a substantial portion of tuition. The rest was manageable from savings without touching Grandma's trust. I read the letter 3 times. Then I clicked the acceptance link. There was a box asking whether I intended to enroll. Yes. No. Defer. My cursor hovered. A familiar thought appeared. What if something happens with Grandma? What if Mom needs me? What if this trust mess gets worse? What if Brooke's situation becomes an emergency? I looked toward the window. My car sat beneath the parking light. The black overnight bag was still in the trunk. I selected yes. Then I paid the enrollment deposit from my checking account. No trust money. No permission. No promise from Dad. Mine. For the first time that day, I smiled. The phone rang before I could close the confirmation page. Brooke. I almost let it go. Then I answered. Her voice sounded different. Not softer exactly. Less defended. Dad says you gave him permission. I glanced toward the folder on my table. For what? To use your education allocation for me. No, he says you did. I didn't. A long silence. I could hear Brooke breathing. Then she said, I asked him where the permission was. My fingers tightened around the phone. What did he say? That it wasn't written down because everybody trusted each other back then. Of course. Brooke continued. Then he said you remember agreeing and you're lying now because you want more money. I closed my eyes. I'm not asking the trust to give me more money. I know. Those 2 words surprised me more than they should have. Brooke exhaled. Tomorrow. What about tomorrow? I want him to say it with both of us sitting there. My eyes moved to the documents I had spent days arranging. The old ledger. The disbursement. My tuition history. Dad's current spreadsheet. Ethan's email. Not one magical piece of paper. A sequence. A history that could no longer change shape every time Dad needed a different version. Okay, I said. Brooke was quiet for another moment. Then she asked, "What are you bringing?" I looked at the folder. For once? What? The timeline. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't preparing for a family meeting to defend myself. I was going in with the dates. The next morning, I printed one page. Not the entire file. Not the trust agreement. Not the email archive or the tuition records, or every document I had collected over the previous week. One page. 5 lines. I had interrupted college while helping care for grandma and keeping things running at home. An education advancement had later been charged against my beneficiary record. The archive disbursement showed that money had gone to Brooks University. No verified document showed that I had authorized the transfer. That same disputed advancement was now being used to justify another distribution to Brooks' household. Beside each line, I wrote the source. That was all I needed. For most of my life, I had walked into conversations with Dad carrying paragraphs in my head. Explanations, context, examples, every possible answer to every accusation he might make. Then he would say one sentence. "You're being dramatic." And suddenly, I would spend the next hour proving I wasn't. That morning, I decided he was not going to choose the question. Grandma wanted the meeting at her apartment. When I arrived, Ethan was already there. He opened the door and looked at the folder in my hand. "That's it?" "That's it. I thought you'd bring a rolling cabinet." I considered a forklift. He smiled, but his eyes looked tired. "You okay?" "No." "Good answer." I stepped inside. Mom sat rigidly on the sofa beside Dad. Brooke was at Grandma's dining table, turning a teaspoon between her fingers. No one greeted me warmly. That was fine. I hadn't come for warmth. Grandma pointed to the empty chair across from Brooke. "Sit." I did. Dad looked at my folder. "Before we start, I want it understood that this has gotten completely out of proportion." I opened the folder. "I'm going to finish the timeline first. Then you can respond." His eyebrows rose. "Natalie, I'm your father, not a witness. I know who you are." Mom shifted sharply. "Can we not start with that tone?" I looked at Grandma. "Are you comfortable continuing?" "Yes." That was enough. I placed the single page on the table. "The first point is not disputed. I left college while Grandma was recovering, and while more responsibilities at home needed coverage." Dad shook his head. "You chose to leave. I said you could respond when I'm done." His mouth tightened. I continued. "The second point is documented in the trust ledger. An education advancement was charged against my beneficiary record." I placed the ledger beneath the first page. "The third point comes from the archived disbursement packet. The payee was Brooks University." Brooks stopped moving the spoon. Dad crossed his arms. "You've already shown everybody that." "Yes." I placed the next document down. "The fourth point is what has not been produced. There is no verified written consent from me directing that advancement to Brooke." "That doesn't mean there wasn't a conversation," Dad said. "I'm almost finished." He stared at me. I continued. "The fifth point is the reason this matters now. The same advancement is being counted as prior support to me in the current beneficiary comparison. That makes Brooke appear to have received less support and is being used to justify a new distribution." I put Dad's spreadsheet on top. The notes column was visible, voluntarily redirected to Brooke. I folded my hands. "That's the timeline." Dad leaned back. "Are you done?" "Yes." "Good. Because you've managed to turn a perfectly reasonable decision from nearly 20 years ago into some kind of moral indictment." Brooke spoke before I could. "Where did Natalie give permission?" Dad looked at her. "We've been through that." "No," Brooke said. "You've said she did. I'm asking where." "It was discussed." "With her?" "Yes." I looked at him. "When?" Dad's jaw moved. "It was a long time ago." "That's not a date." "Oh, stop it. Nobody remembers exact dates from that long ago." "Then why does your current spreadsheet state my consent as a fact?" Dad slapped one palm lightly against the table. "Because that was the understanding." "Whose?" "The family's." I looked around the room. "Grandma?" Grandma shook her head. "My understanding came from Martin." "Mom?" Mom's mouth tightened. "Your father handled those requests." "Ethan." He leaned back. "I was as a teenager." I turned to Brooke. She stared at Dad. He raised both hands. "This is ridiculous." Natalie had stepped away from school. Brooke was enrolled. The money was intended for education. We used it for education. You told Grandma I agreed, I said. You weren't going back. I was asking you when I could. That isn't what I remember. Ethan has an email from years later asking why Grandma's education fund wasn't helping me with my night classes. Dad glanced toward him. Ethan said, "You told me not to reopen it." "That proves nothing." "It proves I was still in school," I said. Dad looked back at me. "You went back later. I was taking classes while you were still telling people I had already had my chance." His face changed. Not guilt. Impatience. I recognized it immediately. He was tired of facts that refused to behave like children. "You want the truth?" he asked. "Yes." We made the decision that made sense. The room became very quiet. Dad leaned forward. "You had left school. Brooke hadn't. She had a clear plan. She had the grades. She had a future in front of her. We weren't going to let money sit unused because you couldn't decide what you wanted." The old version of me would have flinched. This time I heard the structure underneath the insult. One daughter's future was fixed. The other daughter's was expendable. "What did I get in exchange for the advancement you charged to me?" He frowned. "What kind of question is that?" "A simple one. You got a roof over your head. You got support. You got time." "Time to do what?" "Figure yourself out." Grandma shifted beside us. Dad continued, before she could speak. "And after all that, you still got your degree. You have a good job. So, what exactly was taken from you?" There it was. The accounting system he understood best. If I survived the cost, then the cost must not have mattered. I looked at him. "Years," he scoffed. "Oh, please. Years of finishing school around everyone else's needs. Years of being told I lacked discipline for a delay you benefited from. Years of hearing Brooke used as proof of what I could have been if I'd only tried harder." Brooke looked down. Dad shook his head. "You're rewriting your entire childhood because you found one ledger entry." "No, I'm correcting one ledger entry because it's still affecting decisions today. And there it is," he said. "Back to paperwork." "Yes." The answer stopped him for a second. I tapped his spreadsheet. "Because paperwork is where your story stopped changing." Mom spoke quietly. "Martin, maybe just tell her you should have recorded it differently." Dad looked at her as though she had betrayed him. "I'm not apologizing for putting education money toward the child who was actually in school." Brooke's head came up. "The child?" He turned. "You know what I mean." "No," Brooke said. "I don't think I do." Dad exhaled hard. "This is exactly what Natalie wanted. She wanted to turn you against me. I asked you a question. And I answered it. No. You said I was the better investment without using the word investment." Dad looked genuinely offended. "That's not what I said." Brooke pushed her chair back slightly. "It's what you meant." Mom reached for her. "Brooke, sweetheart." Brooke pulled her arm away. "Don't." Dad stood. "This has gone far enough." I remained seated. "We still need to address the current request." He laughed once. "Of course we do. Because after all this theater, that's what you're really holding over everyone." "I'm not holding anything over anyone. You have the authority to approve it. Under documented criteria. And you know Brooke's household needs it. Need isn't the only requirement. Her children shouldn't have to rearrange their plans because you're angry about something that happened before they were born. They won't be punished for anything. Then approve it." "No." The word landed harder this time, because no one could pretend I had said it from confusion. Dad pointed at the spreadsheet. "You know how to fix the numbers." "Yes." "You know how to make this work." "Yes." "Then do it." I looked at him. "No." His face reddened. "Why?" "Because the correct process does not require me to absorb the consequences of promises you made. That is not what's happening." Brooke spoke from across the table. "You told me the money was guaranteed." Dad looked at her. "It should have been." "By who?" "The trust." "That isn't what I asked." His expression tightened. Brooke's voice became steadier. "Who guaranteed it?" Dad hesitated. "You knew there was money available. You told me you had handled it." "Because Natalie was supposed to handle it." Nobody moved. Brooke stared at him. "You promised money you didn't control because you assumed she would sign?" Dad's eyes flicked toward me, then back to her. "She always handles these things." That sentence did more than any accusation I could have made. Not because he confessed to a crime. He didn't. Because he said the assumption out loud. She always handles these things. Grandma leaned back in her chair. Ethan looked at the floor. Mom closed her eyes briefly. Dad seemed to realize the room had shifted, because his voice hardened. Fine. Yes. I expected Natalie to be reasonable. I nodded. There it is. Oh, don't start. I'm not starting anything. You've spent your whole life making simple things difficult. No. I've spent my whole life making difficult things disappear before you had to deal with them. He stared at me. I could feel my pulse in my palms, but my voice stayed level. I'm not doing that anymore. Dad's mouth flattened. So what happens now? I opened the second page in my folder. The independent reconciliation has enough support to correct the disputed beneficiary treatment according to the trust records. I am not making that adjustment myself where it affects my own position. The corporate fiduciary will handle the correction. Dad rolled his eyes. Wonderful. Once the corrected balances are entered, Brooke can resubmit the education request under the same criteria that apply to everyone else. Brooke looked at me. So, I'm not being cut out? No. Dad frowned. Then what was the point of all this? The point is, you don't get an exception because you promised one. I continued. Future requests go through documented channels. No more verbal approvals attributed to Grandma. No more requests coming through you or Mom as though they're already decided. Mom's face tightened. You're excluding us. No, you don't have a formal distribution role. We're her parents. That isn't a trust position. Dad gave a bitter laugh. There's the compliance officer. Yes. For once, I didn't hear the phrase as an insult. Brooke stared at the current worksheet. What happens if my corrected request is smaller? Then it's smaller. And if it doesn't qualify? Then it doesn't qualify. Dad pointed at me. You hear that? She doesn't care what happens to your kids. Brooke turned toward him. Stop. He froze. She continued. You told me this was guaranteed. I was trying to help you. And now you're trying to make her responsible because you were wrong. Dad's face changed again. He looked less angry than stunned. Brooke had disagreed with him before. I was sure of that. But I had rarely seen her refuse the role he gave her while I was in the room. Mom whispered. Brooke, he was only trying to support you. Brooke looked at her. I know. Then she looked back at Dad. That doesn't mean he gets to promise someone else's decision. Nobody spoke. I closed the folder. The meeting was over for me. Dad apparently disagreed. So that's it? For today. You blow up the entire family. Accuse me of stealing your future. And now you walk out. I never accused you of stealing my future. That's what all of this means. No. I stood. It means you made decisions about my future because you believed I would accept them. Then you spent years describing those decisions as mine. His face went still. That stops here. Mom stood too. If you walk out now, don't expect everything to go back to normal. I picked up my folder. That's the idea. Grandma reached for my hand. I let her take it. She didn't ask me to forgive anyone. She only said, call me tomorrow. I will. Ethan walked me to the door. Brooke stayed behind. That was her choice. I didn't turn around to see whether she sat beside Dad or moved away from him. I didn't need to know yet. 3 weeks later, the corporate trustee completed the historical reconciliation. The disputed advancement was corrected according to the verified records. I did not receive a windfall. No check appeared in my mailbox. No one announced that I was suddenly owed millions. The accounting simply stopped pretending Brooke's education payment had benefited me. That correction changed the comparison used for future distributions. Brooke's request was resubmitted. It was not approved in the form Dad had promised. Some eligible education costs qualified under the trust. Others did not. Brooke and her household adjusted the rest. Dad had a choice too. He could continue helping with his own money if he wanted. What he could no longer do was promise trust funds and expect me to transform his promise into authorization. The first time the corporate trustee copied me on a new request submitted directly by a beneficiary without Dad attached, I stared at the email for several seconds. Nothing dramatic happened. No fireworks. No family member apologized. The system simply worked without him standing in the middle. That might have been the consequence he hated most. For years, he had been the person everyone called because he knew what Grandma would approve, what somebody really meant, what had supposedly already been agreed. Now those statements required documentation. His certainty no longer counted as authority. And I was no longer available to turn certainty into fact. Mom kept her distance. At first, I told myself it was temporary. Then Sunday dinner came and went without an invitation. A holiday brunch passed the same way. The first exclusion hurt. The second hurt differently. By the third, I stopped leaving the time open. That was harder than it sounds. For years, Sunday afternoon had belonged to a possibility. Maybe Mom would call. Maybe Dad needed something. Maybe Grandma needed groceries. Maybe there was a last-minute dinner. I began putting other things there. Reading, coursework, a long walk, coffee with people from the university whose lives did not require me to earn my chair. Grandma and I still saw each other. I visited because I wanted to, not because someone assigned me. Sometimes we talked about the trust. More often we didn't. One afternoon, after the transition work had settled, I told her, "I don't want this to become my second job." She understood immediately. "I was wondering when you'd say that. I'll finish what I agreed to finish. But I don't want the next 20 years to be everyone calling me about distributions." Grandma smiled faintly. "Good. The trust already had professional administration. Together with the corporate trustee, we completed a structure that kept routine processing and independent review where they belonged. I retained only the limited responsibilities required during the transition, and whatever defined role remained appropriate afterward. I did not become the new family gatekeeper. I did not replace Dad at the center. That mattered to me more than I expected. Winning a fight about control would have meant very little if my reward was a lifetime of controlling everyone else. Brooke and I didn't become close overnight. For several months, we barely spoke. Then Ethan called one evening. "You're going to hate this story." Promising opening. There was a dinner at Aunt Linda's. "I already hate it." He laughed. "Someone said you were always the one who threw away college." I closed the book I was reading. "And?" Brooke corrected them. I didn't say anything. Ethan continued. "She said, that isn't what happened. Dad was sitting right there." My chest tightened. "What did he say?" "Nothing useful." I smiled despite myself. A few days later, Brooke texted, "Can we talk?" I waited until I actually had time instead of answering because the message existed. "We met after work." She looked nervous. That was new. "I owe you an apology," she said. I waited. Brooke folded her hands around her coffee. "I didn't know all of it." "I know. But that's not enough." I said nothing. She looked at me. I knew enough to wonder. There was no defensive edge this time. "I saw you taking classes. I knew Dad's story changed depending on the conversation. Sometimes you'd quit. Sometimes you'd given me your opportunity. I didn't ask because the version where everything was fine worked for me." "The honesty landed more deeply than a perfect apology would have," she continued. "And I used it against you. I called you inconsistent. I let Dad compare us when I knew it bothered you. Sometimes I joined in." "Yes." Brooke swallowed. "I'm sorry. I didn't tell her it was okay." "It wasn't. I appreciate you saying that." She nodded. "Is there any chance we can fix this?" The old answer would have been immediate. "Of course. We're sisters." Instead I said, "Maybe." Her eyes dropped. I continued. "But slowly." She nodded again. "Slow is fair." That was where we started. Not with forgiveness as a gift. With behavior. Mom took longer. She occasionally sent messages through Ethan until I told him not to carry them. After that, she texted me directly. Most of them contained some version of the same request. "Your father wants peace. Your father misses you. You know how stubborn he is." Each time, I answered only what belonged to me. "I'm available to talk when both of you are willing to discuss what happened without asking me to apologize for correcting it." No essays. No pleading. No negotiation over whether my memories were sufficiently polite. Dad sent nothing directly for months. That hurt too. I wish I could say it didn't. Boundaries did not remove love. They removed access. Those were different things. Nearly a year after Grandma's birthday dinner, I stood in the bedroom of a new apartment surrounded by moving boxes. The place was 20 minutes closer to the university and almost an hour farther from my parents. I had never chosen a home that way before. The condo I sold had been convenient to everyone. This place was convenient to me. Campus was close. Work was close. The grocery store I liked was close. There was a small park 2 blocks away. None of those reasons involved emergency response time. I carried the last box upstairs, then remembered something in the trunk. The black overnight bag. It was still there. Same broken zipper pull. Same spare blouse. Same charger. Same toothbrush I should have replaced years ago. I carried it inside and placed it on the bed. One by one, I emptied it. The charger went into my desk. The toiletries went into the bathroom. The sneakers went into the closet. The blouse went into the laundry. Then I folded the empty bag and put it on the top shelf. It was just luggage now. That evening, I opened my laptop at the small desk beside the window. My graduate coursework had started months earlier. The first semester had been exhausting. Not because I couldn't handle the material, because I was learning what happened when my calendar belonged to me. I had taken on a project at the university, focused on returning adult students, especially people whose education had been interrupted by caregiving, employment, or other responsibilities that traditional programs often treated like personal failure. Nothing about the project was glamorous: policy drafts, data, reviews, interviews, funding proposals. I loved it. For the first time, the years I had once hidden when explaining my education had become expertise I could use without being ashamed of how I acquired it. One night in class, the professor was discussing barriers faced by returning students when my phone vibrated beside my notebook. I glanced down. "Mom, your father says this can still be fixed if you come home and apologize." I read the message once. The old reaction arrived on schedule. My stomach tightened. My mind began assembling responses. Apologize for what? Why is it always me? Tell him he can call me himself. Then another memory surfaced. 20 years earlier, sitting at my parents' kitchen table, with a class schedule beside my elbow. "Brooke has momentum. You can always go back." I had gone back, just not when I should have been allowed to. Not without making myself smaller first. The professor changed slides. A sentence appeared on the screen about how institutions define persistence. My pen was already in my hand. I turned the phone face down. I didn't block Mom. I didn't send an angry message. I didn't explain. I wrote the next line in my notebook. For years, Dad had said I wasted my chance. Sitting there with my notebook open and my phone face down beside it, I understood the truth. The first opportunity I stopped wasting was my own.